My editor sent me to debunk a haunted house. I left a believer. The house is gone now, burned to the ground, but the messages the ghosts wrote on the walls are burned into my memory forever. My name is Thomas, and in 1937, I was a journalist and a staunch skeptic. When my editor sent me to Essex to expose the so-called most haunted house in England, I jumped at the chance. The house was Borley Rectory, a gloomy Victorian building already famous for its ghosts. I arrived expecting to find creaky floorboards and local superstitions. I met the lead investigator, Harry Price, who was leasing the property. He was well aware of my mission to debunk his work. "I'm here to report the truth," I told him. "Good," he replied with a knowing smile. "So are we." That evening, Price told me the legends. The most famous was that of a 13th century nun who fell in love with a monk from a nearby monastery. When their plan to elope was discovered, the monk was hanged and the nun was walled up alive within her convent, doomed to starve in the darkness. It was her ghost, they said, who was now seen walking the garden path. But the stories were not all ancient history. The most recent tenants, the Foister family, had been driven out by a terrifying and violent poltergeist. Servant bells would ring incessantly, stones and bottles would be thrown from empty rooms, and small fires would spontaneously break out. The activity seemed centered around the rector's wife, Mary Ann, as if a desperate, unseen entity was trying to communicate with her. My first night was uneventful, which only strengthened my resolve. The next day, I set about my work with vigor. I was determined to be methodical. I inspected the servant bells myself. Their wires were indeed severed and brittle with age. I spent an hour in the library, tapping on walls, searching for hidden speakers or secret passages that could explain the disembodied whispers people reported. I stomped on the floorboards, trying to replicate the phantom footsteps. For every phenomenon, I had a plausible, rational theory. The house was old, poorly constructed, and susceptible to drafts and rats. That's all it was. That evening, however, my confidence began to crack. I was in the library with two of Price's observers, arguing a point about atmospheric pressure causing doors to slam. As I spoke, a heavy glass inkwell on the mantelpiece, a good 2 feet from the edge, slid forward as if pushed by an invisible hand and shattered on the floor. A dead silence fell over the room. There was no vibration, no logical cause. Later, as I lay in my bed, trying to rationalize what I had seen, I heard them. The distinct, shuffling footsteps of someone pacing back and forth in the empty hallway, right outside my locked door. My rational explanations were starting to feel like thin armor against a rising tide of the impossible. The next day, Price took me to a small, bare room on the ground floor. "This is where the wall writings happen," he said, his voice low. Faint pencil-like scrawls covered a section of plaster. They were pleas for help, often addressed to Mary Ann. I told him it could easily be a hoax by one of his team. He simply nodded. "Then you shall stay here and watch. Seal the door yourself." And so I did. Another observer, a no-nonsense woman named Helen, joined me. We entered the room just before dusk. We inspected the walls. They were bare, having been recently whitewashed to provide a clean slate. We locked the heavy oak door from the inside, and as a precaution, I melted wax over the keyhole and pressed my own signet ring into it. No one could enter without breaking the seal. We sat in 2 hardback chairs facing the wall, and we waited. Hours passed in near total silence. The only sounds were our own breathing and the groaning of the old house. My eyes grew heavy. Just as I was about to dismiss the whole thing as another dead end, Helen gasped, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence. My head snapped up. There, on the wall in front of us, a faint gray line was forming. We watched, frozen in a state of terrified disbelief, as the line slowly, deliberately, began to form a letter. It was like watching an invisible pencil move across the plaster. There was no sound, just the silent, impossible appearance of a word. Then another. When it was finished, we stared at the wall. our hearts hammering against our ribs. The message was clear, written in a childlike, looping script. "Marianne, please help get." We sat in stunned silence for what felt like an hour. My mind, the logical, skeptical mind of a journalist, was reeling, trying and failing to find a foothold. There was no trick. We were in a sealed room. We had witnessed it together. My life, my understanding of the world, was irrevocably split into two parts: the time before that room and the time after. After that night, I stopped trying to debunk the haunting. I had become one of the witnesses. The house seemed to open up to me then. I heard the phantom coach myself, the sound of hooves on gravel when the drive was empty. I felt the unnerving cold spots that would appear and disappear in the hallways. And once, as I looked out at the garden at sunset, I saw a fleeting gray shape moving slowly down the Nun's Walk before dissolving into the twilight. The house was a place of profound sadness, its phenomena feeling like desperate cries for attention. I left Borley a different man, my notebook filled with experiences I knew no one would believe. 2 years later, in 1939, the rectory burned to the ground. The fire, which started in the hallway, was officially blamed on an overturned oil lamp. But many of us knew of the prophecy, written on the walls by the spirits themselves, that had predicted the fire. It also claimed the ruins would reveal the bones of the murdered nun. During the excavation of the cellars, digging through the charred remains, workers found them, fragments of a young woman's skull, buried deep beneath the floor. The legend was true. The rectory is gone, but the land remains haunted. I never went back. I didn't need to. The memory of that silent, impossible writing is as clear today as it was all those decades ago. I went to Borley to find a simple truth, and I did. The truth is that there are things in this world that are far beyond our understanding, and some stories soaked into the very earth can never be erased.
We build our homes with brick and mortar to keep the world out, but some houses are built on a foundation of sorrow, and no wall, no matter how thick, is enough to keep the past from whispering its secrets.